Okay, let's talk about spring brake chambers. Now, when we hear the term spring brake chambers, it means it's on the back of the truck and it's the parking brake incorporated with a service brake with one air chamber. So this front section of this is the service brake. This back section is what's called the spring brake. This is the most dangerous thing on the truck as far as individual components that we work on. Inside this chamber, from about the center section, about right here, back, which will give you an idea, that's not very far, this spring is housed. Okay, it's a big coil spring. It's got 1,800 to 2,000 pounds of pressure on that. So that spring is compressed to where that it's basically that big. Okay, so anytime you're working on this service brake chamber on one of the rear axles of an air brake truck, you need to be sure you're following all safety precautions because this thing, like I said, can kill you. Okay, so anytime you're working on this spring brake setup here, meaning it has the double pods here, okay, even if you're not taking this apart, that big scary spring has to be caged that's in the back of this. So that's one of your task sheets for this week, is how to cage and uncage a park brake chamber spring or a spring brake chamber spring. So that's done with a caging tool. It's got two ears here on the end. It's threaded. It's got a washer and a nut. It stores on the chamber. So all trucks should have this stored right here. So before we do any work on this spring brake, that tension has got to be basically captured and compressed, because if you just try to unbolt this chamber without it being caged, it will launch this whole component at you with about 2,000 pounds of force. Okay, it can kill you. So we have to be sure anytime we're working on this rear spring brake component that we install this caging tool. So the caging tool goes through a hole in the back of the chamber here. Okay. The two ears engage a piston that is inside here on the front side of this spring, and when you tighten the nut up, it pulls all that spring tension back and captures it where it's not pushing on this chamber. So we're going to go inside this hole in the back. There's a slot inside the piston that those two ears go in. When we get it in there, we can turn this about 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn. It won't turn anymore, and when I pull back, it's locked in. Then I start tightening that down. One trick to this is be sure that the threads are very well lubricated, because it will strip this nut out, because you're putting about 2,000 pounds of force on this nut here. It's like a 1/2 inch nut, 3/4 inch is what fits it, or socket, on these threads. So that's a lot of force. When it's caged all the way, you will have roughly about that much of that bolt sticking out. It will get extremely hard to turn as you're tightening this down, because you're pulling that big heavy spring into such a compressed area. Okay, once this is caged on the spring, this truck does not have any parking brakes, so be sure that wheels are chalked while you're caging these two brakes on the back, because they'll be on one axle on the back. The truck can roll, so even though you have the park brake set, if this caging tool is installed, there is no parking brake on the truck. So obviously you have to be sure you uncage it when you're done working on it, so that the truck has a parking brake and doesn't roll off and crash into something. And obviously you don't want it to roll over you while you're working on it. So as always, be sure that we have the wheel chocks installed on the truck before we start caging the spring.